Thank you for the privilege. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm so delighted that you're here. Just want to thank President Collins for his constant support of the semesterly seminar that we do put on by the College of Biblical Studies and Ministry. Thanks to Dean Wyatt Huxford for his leadership in this event. And we're just really, really excited about today. Delighted to have with us Dr. Crawford Loritts. If you want to know everything there is to know about his life and ministry, and there's a lot, you can Google him. I'll just give you a few highlights off the highlight reel. I became aware of Dr. Loritts through his work at Cru, formerly Campus Crusade for Christ. He was with them in executive leadership for many years. Most recently, he has left a 15-year pastorate in the Atlanta area, Roswell, Georgia, of Fellowship Bible Church. He's also a prolific writer. I was telling him in the run-up this morning that I read one of his essays last year and was so moved by it, I was texting my friends, asking if they had read it. And he's here today to speak about leadership, to invest in us. And so I'd like for you to give a warm welcome to Dr. Loritts.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, and I had to get up with the chickens. No, I didn't get up with the chickens. I woke the chickens up this morning. Come down from Atlanta. You know, we live on the north side of Atlanta, so there's not a non-traffic way of getting anywhere. And so if I waited too long to leave, I would have been late. So I was down here very, very early, just kind of greeting people as they came in and this kind of thing. So, but it's really, really a treat to be here. Anybody sleepy here? Tell the truth. Well, here's the deal. If you feel like sleeping, please go to sleep while I speak. I mean, I could bless you in that way. I slept on the best of them, so what goes around comes around. And but let me request one thing. If you're sleepy, don't do like this. That's distracting. And don't do like this, pretending as if you're reading or praying. Then we got character issues. That's lying. So just go ahead and go to sleep. It's not a good look to fight sleep. When I was pastoring, in the first service, there was this woman. She was like 94, 95 years old. She sat in the second row on the end in the first service. And God used that lady to humble me. I thought my message was going well, but every Sunday, about 8 to 10 minutes into my message, not only would she go to sleep, but she would throw her head back and her mouth would be open. And I'm saying, oh, Father Abraham. So my goal was to keep her awake, but it never happened. She went on to glory, and, but anyway. Bring you greetings from my wife. She's the joy of my life. We've been married now. We celebrated last year our 50th wedding anniversary, and she's just an amazing person. My kids get on my case right now. Of course, we're empty nesters and this kind of thing. So all the kids keep saying, Dad, especially the oldest son of mine, Brian, he goes, Dad, man, you seem like whatever Mom wants, you let her have it. I said, well, yes, no her, no you. And the other thing, she's been married to me so long, it's just like combat pay. And so I owe her a lot. So, but I just tell her, I said, now, sweetheart, at this stage again, whatever you ask me, the answer is yes. Whatever you want, the answer is yes. Now, there's a caveat. We might have to get us a room at the Atlanta Mission, but the answer is yes. And we'll be out there in 85 and 75 with signs on the exit ramps, and I'll just say, did you enjoy that? But, she thinks I'm crazy. I wrestle a bit with what to share today. There are two things on my heart and mind, and so I'm going to share both of them. The first part of what I want to talk about is I wrote a book a number of years ago called Leadership as an Identity, and I want to talk about that a bit. And then secondly, I want to talk about how not to be branded by discouragement, which is, for anybody that's in leadership, that you wrestle with that all the time. That's sort of the dark side of leadership, right? I mean, expectations are not met, and disappointment is a daily thing, and dreams and goals sometimes are not fulfilled. And so how do you not be branded by discouragement? So I want to talk about those two things. Before I get started, let's just bow our heads for a word of prayer. Holy Father, we thank you for your love and grace and mercy. You have been better to us than we deserve, Lord. Sometimes, oh God, we get pulled into the funk of seeing the dark side of things. But Lord, I pray that you'll fill our hearts with profound gratitude for your mercy in our lives, for the privilege of serving you, the opportunities before us, particularly to help shape future generations. So God, I pray that you'll work in and through us in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Nothing happens, nothing ever happens apart from leadership. Nothing. Leadership is the action, directional gift. It translates vision to reality. And so nothing happens apart from leadership. A number of years ago, many years back, I was asked to be a visiting professor at the Trinity Evangelical Divinity School outside of Chicago, and they asked me to teach a course entitled The Essence of Biblical Leadership. Doesn't that sound like a seminary dean? Ask you to, never mind, I shouldn't do that, some deans are here. So as I was approaching that course, I love reading about leadership and this kind of thing. I read everything I get my hands on about distinctively biblical leadership. And as I was reading through this stuff, and I don't mean to sound dismissive or elitist or condescending or whatever, but as I was reading a number of these books, I got a little disturbed by something. Not all of them were very helpful, but some of the stuff that they said was anchored in a biblical perspective on leadership. I don't know that I agreed with that. There were verses that they would take, their leadership principles that they would take and take a verse and slap it on it. So that was, and I thought to myself, it's inspirational what they're saying, it's transactional what they're saying, but I don't know that that's exactly what the Bible teaches. So I pushed that aside a little bit, and I went back to the scriptures with this question in mind. And this question is an intentional question. What is it that every man or woman of God, what is it that they had in common that caused God to trust them with his assignments? Now that question is loaded with a bunch of assumptions. In fact, let me just parse it a little bit, and then I'll get back and answer the question. In the Bible, the only reason why you have leadership is because something needs to be done. It's not about position. It's not about status. Not about the top box on the org chart. None of that. In the Bible, assignment defines leadership. It defines leadership. And so the only reason why there's a leader is because they've been given a stewardship to execute something. And notice I use the term stewardship. And so as I began to read through the scripture, and I tried to be as objective as possible. I don't know that anybody is totally unbiased, but as I read through the scriptures, I discovered that God had an amazing sense of humor. An amazing sense of humor. There is no certain personality profile that God uses in leadership. Sorry. You know, and it was, I always say Enneagram, I can't pronounce it. You know, the DISC test, the Myers-Briggs, all this other kind of stuff that we use. That you know, there's no personality. You got extroverts, introverts. You got hesitant. Most of them are hesitant. People reluctant. They're all over the place. So you don't have this bombastic personality that sucks all the air out of the room and dominates stuff that we would say is, profile of leader. So there's no certain personality profile. There's no certain pedigree. None. You can't, with intellectual honesty, you can't find that. And there's no common educational exposure or background. They're just like all over the map. It's almost as if God has a sense of humor. And so you say to yourself, okay, You got reluctant farmers, you got broken people, you got, educated folks, you got folks who are not educated, you got people with a lot of exposure, none with no exposure. So what did they have in common? What did they have in common? Well, as I read through the scriptures, I discovered that every great man or woman of God that God trusted with his assignments had these 4 characteristics in common. Now, these 4 things should be true of every follower of Christ, but they're exponentially true of the people that God trusts with his assignment. And by the way, they're all driven by character. I'm going to just put a pin in that, and I'm going to say a few other things here. I think sometimes when we teach leadership and we talk about leadership, we need to make a distinction between leadership development and leader development. They are not the same thing. Leader development has to do with the character, the person, who that individual is. Not so much the transactional stuff. Leadership development has to do with planning, leading, organizing, and controlling, and the tools and things, the ability to make measurable goals, hold people accountable, resource development, alignment, all those tools. That's leadership development. And sometimes in some of these books, they get a little murky with confusing the two. Now, of course, leadership development is in the scriptures too, the wisdom books, and you can take a look at how Nehemiah went about building. There's all kinds of plans, and even Paul had a 7-fold strategy in terms of how he went about establishing. So there is process stuff in the scriptures. However, the overwhelming, dominant emphasis in the Bible has to do with character. Because here's a differentiating point. In the scriptures, the leader or the gift of leader or the person who is leading is prophetic. What do you mean by that? Now this is huge. That means, this is the reason why character is everything. The leader has to be the portrait of the desired destination at which the enterprise needs to arrive. That is huge. That is huge. The Bible, leadership is incarnational. It's not just the assignments that you're doing, but you have got to be the portrait of that assignment. Furthermore, the passion of a godly leader is that his or her character is always greater than the platform that they stand on. I didn't say that always a reality, but that is the passion of a leader. And so, I find sometimes we get too pedestrian about leadership, even in our churches and Christian organizations, schools, and what have you. Obviously you got to get things done. Don't get me wrong. You got to get stuff done, and you got to execute. It's not unspiritual. That's why you're there. Okay. However, I think sometimes we wink and nod and give a pass, and no, your character is everything. Everything. God likes to serve his meals on clean plates. Okay, and so the other thing is that in the scriptures, it's not just that you're a picture of the desired destination, but your character needs to be magnetic. Hopefully, people want to be the positive things that you're demonstrating as a person. So, having said that, so every great man or woman of God that God's trusted with his assignments have had at least these 4 things in common. The first one is this, and they're almost embarrassing. I wrote my whole book on leadership is about this. The first one is that every great man or woman of God that God's trusted with his assignments have been marked, number 1, by brokenness. Brokenness. And that's because, there's some things that I wish were not true. From personal experience, I wish it wasn't true. And this is one of them. One of the realities is that over the long haul, God never uses anything in a sustained way that comes to him together. God does not do double billing. God does not do double billing. So, in order for God to use leaders in a sustained way, they have to experience brokenness. Now, I want to differentiate between brokenness and woundedness. You can be wounded without having been broken, but you can't be broken without having been wounded. What's the difference? A wounded person, you don't want to give them a position of leadership or public platform because typically they will use that position and that platform as a means of their own personal therapy. And a lot of people get hurt. A lot of people get hurt. It's, they will pass it off sometimes as being broken or we're wounded and we're in this journey together. But if you listen to them, they're not speaking from a place where Jesus has met them in their struggle. They're more celebrating the fact that they're wounded. And it's not redemptive. Now, I'm not blaming the victim as I say this. Brokenness is a different thing. Brokenness says, yes, I've been hurt, I've been wounded, but let me share with you how Jesus has met me at my place of woundedness. And that gives redemptive hope to people. And so it's the brokenness. Now, let me give a biblical illustration. Let me give a definition. Brokenness is a permanent sense, a delightfully permanent sense of God neediness. It's a delightful sense, permanent sense of God neediness. I can't do this apart from him, but neither do I want to do this apart from him. I'm always dependent. Broken people do not use the gifts and tools that's been given to them as a means of their identity or self-actualization. They have them. That's what God uses, but that's not them. Their character, their dependence upon God is greater than the outstanding gifts, talents, and abilities that they have. Now, I'll give you, and I can go almost anywhere, but Moses is a classic illustration, right? Classic illustration. By the time we get to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, he's a broken person. And be careful. I've heard young, lazy preachers preach on Moses. Oh, the reason why God used Moses to deliver the children of Israel because he was familiar with the hollow halls of the palace. And that's not wolf feathers. That's not true. And it really isn't true. It sounds good, but it's not true. By the time you get to Moses in Exodus 3, he's a broken person. God's speaking to him from a bush. And check it out. He's beginning to argue with God. I don't know what, I can't say what I would do, but I would think that if I'm looking at this bush and it ain't being consumed and God is speaking to me, I'd have very little to say, at least at that point. But Moses is arguing with God. And he's telling God all the reasons why he can't do this. And you get to chapter 4. You get to chapter 4, and the text doesn't say it, but there's this feeling that God is getting a little annoyed with Moses. And so he says, oh, man, what's that you got in your hand? It's a shepherd's crook. I've been using it to throw it around. Became a serpent. Let me see your hand. Yeah, 80-year-old hand, varicose vein. Put it in your chest. Pull it out. Leprous. Put it back in. Whole. You know what the message was? Look, buddy, I don't use what you bring to the table. I use what you surrender to me. And that's what brokenness is all about. It's proactive surrender. It is a realization, no, my gifts and talents, abilities, and experience, they don't win the day. God wins the day. He pulls this thing off. And that's exactly the reason why I'm sending you, Moses. That's exactly the reason why I'm sending you. I'm going to send you there with nothing more than a stick and a promise. And I'm going to keep you on a short leash. You're dependent. So the greatest thing, I know this is counterintuitive. The greatest thing that you bring to your position is your dependence upon it. So brokenness is the first. I could say more about that, Dave. There's all kinds of biblical, one right after another. God saying no. And by the way, brokenness is not just a particular point in your life. I have found that, and it's true in my life too, that there's seasons of brokenness. There's seasons of brokenness in your life. And God will use many, many things to keep reminding you that you ain't the fourth member of the Trinity. I know they think you're good. But remember, good is relative. The second characteristic that every great man and woman of God had in common that God used, that caused God to trust him is assignment. Now this was, you guys hang in there with me on this one. First is brokenness. The second one is what I call uncommon communion. Uncommon communion. What do you mean by that? I don't just mean your prayer life. I don't mean just your devotional time. Although that's significant. But by the very nature of God's assignments presupposes gap. Meaning that typically, we don't have everything that we need to do all that God's called us to do. There is a gap. There is a gap. And that's of God. Because when I say uncommon communion, it is the ability to touch the heart of God, to tap into the resources, to translate the reality, to bridge the gap, to get to where you need to be. God's assignments are not just about accomplishing the goals or doing what you put in the brochure or on the website and have people, this is how we're going to do this and all this stuff, and your donors to see that it's realistic and measurable and ridiculous. We gave that and got bang for a buck, and ROI and this kind of thing. Yeah, okay. Now, it's not just about accomplishing what you intend to do, but God's assignments are about changing you. Changing you. Changing you. Let's pick on Moses again. Now, when God called Moses, check this out, man. He had the extraordinary responsibility of leading 2.5 million. 2.5 million Israelites out of Egypt. Wasn't no internet. Wasn't no scenario planning. No precedent. And God kept him on a short leash. He gave him this cloud in the day and this pillar of fire at night. And he said, you see the cloud move or the pillar of fire move, you get your backside in gear and you move. 2.5 minutes? Yes. Every day, Moses would go into this tent of meeting. What is that? Exodus 33. Yeah, I think it is. We'd go into this tent of meeting. And I guarantee I know what he prayed. I guarantee I know what he prayed. Variations on this one line. God, help me. You show me, God would show. And God would would show him. And God would show him. And God would show him. It is God's goal that we become more godly as we execute what he's called us to do. So on your way to doing something, you must become something. Did you hear what I just said? That's the goal. Don't. It sounds crazy, okay? I got a lot of mileage on me, been involved in Christian leadership for many, many years. In recent years, I used to say people get burnt out in ministry because they're doing too much. I think that's partially true. But you know what? I think more accurately, people get burnt out because what they're doing, been called to do, they're doing the wrong way. They're relying on themselves, they're relying on their own energy, they're relying on their own strength, they're relying on their own experiences, and you're not connected to the supernatural. And so what ends up happening is that although you accomplish this, you're thin. God's assignments are not in a parentheses or over here detached from your personal spirituality. It's all a part of what you need to become. And what he's called you to do is vital to your own personal sanctification. And you have to view it that way. A call to lead is a call to intimacy with God. A call to lead is a call to get on your knees and on your face before God. It is a call to bridge that gap and to become something. If you're not more godly based upon the assignments that you have, when it's over, then something's wrong. Then something's wrong. And I say that with a lot of experience. Now, don't get me wrong. You know, you can say, I'm there. I'm there right now. I just, when I retired, I said yes to stuff that I shouldn't have said yes to. And that's on me. Said, you're right. You're writing a check that I didn't put that in your account. Okay? But if you're doing what God called you to do, you are where he's placed you. There's going to be a gap. There's no such thing as a Christian who does not walk by faith. That person doesn't exist. You will. You will. Everybody that names the name of Christ can walk by faith. And the assignments that you have, they're meant to develop you and to grow you, not just to accomplish the mission. So if I'm not more godly, after 15 and a half years as senior pastor at Fellowship Bible Church, 27 years on staff at Crusade and in position of leadership there, if I don't look more like Jesus because of that, something's wrong. And it's not necessarily the organization's fault. It might be this boy, how I thought about what I was doing, how I approached it. So every great man or woman of God, when you look at their lives, whether it's David running from Saul for 16 years, hiding out in caves and begging and pleading with God. And at the end of life, God told David, hey, I took you from following sheep. And I made you. How'd you make me? All that stuff, you were doing what I thought you had. Yeah, that's right. So, the second thing that every great man and woman of God has in common, God trusted with his assignments, is that they were branded and marked by brokenness, uncommon communion. But thirdly, every great man or woman of God that God has entrusted with his assignments over the long run have been branded by and marked by, now listen to how I phrase this, servanthood as an identity and not as a strategy. Okay? I don't mean to sound like a cynic here, but I got to tell you, you know, you read a blog on leadership or listen to podcasts and that kind of thing, and they're all very helpful. But sometimes in the first couple of paragraphs, you'll hear the term, well, we've got to be servant leaders and this kind of thing. But sometimes when I hear that stuff, there's a lot of quid pro quo, you know? It's utilitarian language. In other words, if I serve you, then that's going to affect something else. And that's going to affect the bottom line. It's kind of, no, get me wrong. Yeah, of course we want to be successful about what we do. But in the Bible, servanthood is not a strategy. Servanthood is an identity. It's an identity. You serve. You see, if you give looking for something in return, you technically have given, you invested, right? But as a servant, it's not about investing. It's about the extension of your identity. And by the way, in the Bible, nowhere in the Bible is leadership primarily spoken of as a platform. The two metaphors in the Bible, in fact, the dominant metaphor in the Bible of leadership is that of a shepherd. Shepherd, but also servant. Shepherd and servant. Shepherd and servant. And the only reason why a leader has power, and leaders do have power. Leaders do have power. But the only reason why a leader has power is not that it's a cul-de-sac and is self-serving. The only reason why a leader has position or power is because they're using that to remove the barriers out of the way of the people to execute what God wants. It's never about the leader. Never. And so when younger dudes would come to me, I had a policy I developed, the last 20 years or so. Most of the time, if someone came to me looking and campaigning for a position of leadership, 90% of the time, I wouldn't give it to them. My question is, why do you want it? Why do you want it? What is this about? Now, if you want it because it's an opportunity to serve more people and you're focused on cause, great. Let's talk about how we can leverage this thing, buddy. But if this is another line in your bio and your resume, and this is all about you, right? You think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread? Seriously, you're going to hurt a lot of people. You're going to hurt a lot of people. You're going to put a lid on the very thing. I'll share this with you. When I was on staff with Crew, I was the last 10, 12 years on the leadership there, and there's a young guy that I was really high on that I was over a division, but he didn't report to me, he reported to somebody else. But I had been watching him through the years, and outstanding presence about him, great communicator, this kind of thing. The only problem I began to see is that when the heat got turned on, or when he had to face a bit of adversity, he would run. And in large organizations, you can hide. You can't. I mean, Crusade has like 20,000 staff and 200 countries protectors of the world, and the U.S. side of things, all these divisions, so you can shift and say, God called me to this division. Well, I got wind that he wanted to make a change again. And I love this dude, but I began seeing this pattern in him. So I asked to see him, and he came to my office and said, hey, man, what's this all about, man? I hate you want to make another change. And I happen to know that he was faced with some things that he was told to do that he needed to do but didn't want to do, okay? He just wanted to make it more spiritual than it sounded, but he was saying, no, I paid my dues. That's a flash thing. I hate that line.
I pay my dues, and I think I deserve this kind of thing, and I, this platform, and like to do what you do, and some of the other guys are speaking and this kind of thing. And I said to him, will you give me the permission to talk to you like I would to one of my sons? Would you give me that permission? Yeah, you can shoot straight, shoot straight. So it's all right. No doubt God's given you wonderful gifts and abilities. You have amazing presence. You're articulate, insightful, you're bright, you got all this stuff going for you. But I'm scared for you. I really am. And then I said to him, God won't give you what you want because you won't stick around long enough to get what you need. You have to finish an endurance ride. If you don't finish an endurance ride, your leadership is going to be shallow, superficial. You're going to be gigging and gaming and performing for a crowd. And when they get close to you, they see nothing but an empty suit. Because you don't have any substance. Servanthood, I hate to say it, is developed in obscurity. It's the backside of the desert stuff. And it has to become who you are. So that when you get the recognition, it's Joseph, right? I had a guy, he heard me, I did a series of messages, he heard my radio program, and I called Joseph a spoiled brat. He got all ticked off. He said, how dare you call a man to God use a spoiled brat? I said, because he was one. You don't pump me out, I'm not changing that. He was one. He was an idiot. 17 years old, father giving him this coat of many colors, going around, sharing his dream with his brothers about how he's going to, God save me over you, and all of this stuff, and so the coat wore him. Well, he gets thrown in the pit, a woman hits on him, lies on him, gets thrown into jail, gets forgotten about jail, and all the dreams about that comes with this dream about the famine and all of this, and then they finally go kick Joseph, and when they kick Joseph, they put the robe on him, but the difference now, Joseph, is that when he was 17, the coat wore him. Now he wears the coat. Why? Because he's greater than the garment. You got to be greater than the position. You got to be greater than the garment. So your authority to lead is in direct proportion to your ability to serve. You don't have authority to lead. You don't have moral authority to lead unless your leadership is defined by service. Classic illustration of this one is John 13, right? Jesus. Astonishing. Comes to the upper room, the famous upper room discourse. He comes to the upper room, he's going to die for his disciples. They get to this place, there are no servants there. My research indicates a household that had some substance. They had servants there. And one of the things that the servants did, it was the job of the lowliest of all the servants, was to wash the feet of the disciples. Wash the feet of the invited guests, right? It was a hospitality thing that they did back then. A couple of reasons. You walk, and the other one that you were trying to eat when you didn't want somebody's dirty dogs in your falafel. So they get to this place. Jesus could have pulled the delegation card, right? It's a lot of history. Peter, James, John, Andrew, Bartholomew, go get some water, wash feet here, this kind of thing. What does he do? I don't mean to get so granular here. He takes off his outer garment. Now, you might miss that. what he's wearing is an emboma. The emboma is the undergarment that servants wore when they were doing their household duties. So he takes off his outer garment, and here he is in his emboma. He gets on his knees. He starts to wash feet, and Peter says, don't do that. And don't get upset with Peter. We would have said the same thing. That's demeaning. You're at the top box. You don't do that. And what does Jesus say? In so many words, he says to Peter, hey man, close your mouth. I want to teach you a lesson of leadership that I don't want you to ever forget. And that is, your authority to lead is found in your ability to serve. And you are a servant. You're a servant. It's based upon that observation many years ago, I came to the conclusion I would never, ever ask anybody who ever reported to me to do anything that either I had not done or I'm not willing to do myself. I would never do that. We never do that. And be very careful just hanging around. There's a certain aloofness that we can get in the fraternity of leaders. Be very careful just hanging around leaders. Okay? I know it's the end thing. I tell younger preachers all the time, don't spend too much time in the green room. You know, you start sucking that rarefied air and you start singing How Great Thou Art. You know, come on, man. That's true, right? We justify elitism, right? We justify that stuff. I'm not saying that we shouldn't hang. We learn from leaders and from one another. But, you know, what do you have that God hasn't given you? Come on now. That's why pride is so asininely stupid. Think about it. Most of us are proud of ourselves. We have no control over. Why weren't we born Xhosa, Zulu, Lesotho under apartheid in Africa? Huh? We have no, your DNA and all that. That's not. So most of us are proud of us that we don't have any control over. So that's the third one. The final one is simply this. Every great man and woman of God that God's trusted with his assignments have been marked by brokenness, uncommon communion, servanthood as an identity and as a strategy. But fourthly is radical, immediate obedience. Now, I have a bent. As believers, anything that we do must be an expression of our commitment and acknowledgement that our life is not our own. That we live down here on assignment, and that God has plans for us. And that the will of God is not just some subjective selection of options. That I'm seeking God for Ephesians 2:10, the good works that he's prepared ahead of time, that I should walk in them. And I'm not casual about my choices in my life. I pray about job opportunities. I pray about positions. I pray about assignments. And I don't, you got to be careful of doing stuff because you can. The older you get, you should be doing stuff because you should. Now, let me just read this and I'll be done with this whole thing here. I'm drawn to Acts 13. This is Paul's great eulogy of David. I'm picking up in the middle of the narrative. Verse 22 says, when he,
meaning God, had removed him, meaning Saul. Now he's contrasting the motivation of David with the motivation of Saul. Okay? He raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, listen to this line, I have found in David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, here's the line, who will do all my will. Who will do all my will. And what he's saying here is that the ellipsis is that Saul had a negotiated obedience, which was disobedience. David would do what God said. And we know David wasn't perfect. He repented, but he kept stumbling toward obedience. And then you look down at verse 36, he says, for David, after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep and was laid with his fathers and saw corruption. All of those wills weaving together the tapestry of God's purpose for David while he lived in this earth. And he subordinated his life and choices, placed them under the canopy of God's will. And God's will and plan edited his decisions. David didn't edit God. He submitted to God. He didn't domesticate it. And too many of us are frustrated in our journeys and frustrated and not fulfilled because we're trying to domesticate the purposes and plans of God. We're trying to make him come alongside and serve my desires and my wants. It's not working for us. Because we were born to depend upon God, and hear me, we were born to obey him. We're born to obey him. And so, and again, people have pushed back on me on this, but I believe that God has specific plans for his people. And we need to obey those. The late Bill Bright was a founder and president of Campus Crusade for Christ Crew, and Dr. Bright was the godliest. He and Robertson McQuilkin are two of the most godly men I've ever met in my life. Unbelievable. Dr. Bright died of pulmonary fibrosis, which is an insidious disease. You end up actually dying of asphyxiation, and in the last year and a half of his life, he had oxygen, and sometimes he would come to, I was on the U.S. Cabinet, he would come to the U.S. Cabinet meetings, and he would say this often. He would call our names out. He would look around the room and say, Josh McDowell, Dennis Rainey, Crawford, you don't have to be successful, but you do have to be obedient. It's a good word. Now, he wasn't saying that you not be successful. That wasn't his point. Your focus is an all-consuming passion to be obedient. And by the way, if you're obedient, you'll probably be more successful than you could ever dream or imagine. Right? So that's what it's all about. Yeah, I talked a lot. Can I just take about maybe 10 minutes now and talk about, I want to look back to this whole brokenness thing, and all of us get the wind knocked out of us, don't we, as leaders? Every last one of us. Now, let me differentiate between three words, and I'll say a few words about discouragement. Now, I'm not to be branded by discouragement. There's disappointment, discouragement, and depression. And sometimes we use these terms interchangeably, but they're significantly different. Disappointment is just means what it says. I mean, expectation that and that we get disappointed. We've been disappointed already. Somebody didn't return my text, they didn't return my phone call. I thought Crawford was going to talk about something else, and it's boring me about leadership. You get disappointed. That's this garden variety of life, right? And you know, everybody gets disappointed. It doesn't mean that you're in a fetal position and that you're stopping or anything. I'm just disappointed. The meeting went too long. But let me just jump over to depression, the other extreme. I don't have training in clinical psychology or any of this kind of stuff, so this is a little bit above my pay grade, but I do know this much about depression, that there are two big buckets. There's situational, circumstantial depression, and then there's clinical depression. Sometimes one feeds the other. But the signature of depression is this: you're thrust beneath the hope line. You've lost hope. That's the signature of depression. You can't seem to grasp sustained hope. You're down beneath it. And I would just say, if you're struggling with depression, you have to do the very thing that you detest doing, which is the grand paradox. You have to do what you detest doing, and that is you got to reach out and get help. You have to invite people in. Distortion is also a signature of depression. And you need people to help calibrate your thinking and help you to do that. But let me just get to the discouragement side. Discouragement doesn't mean that means you're disappointed. It doesn't quite mean that you're depressed. The wind has been knocked out of you. You're not quitting, but you're dragging anchor. And we all get discouraged, right? I mean, you open up that email and you go, oh, this sucks. Look at this. What? You listen to that voicemail. You read the text. You come home and find your teenage child is acting like a moral idiot. So, man, come on. Seriously? Now, on the garden variety. Well, the deal is, how do you not get branded by that stuff? I have seen leaders who've gotten so beaten down with discouragement after discouragement that they've been drained of hope. They don't trust anymore. There's this permanent darkness that's over them. And they're not necessarily depressed, but they're sort of marked in time. They're not there. How do you not be that person? Now you're going to think I'm crazy here. So when you're born, you look like your parents. When you die, you look like your decisions, right? Okay? Here's the point. It's not whether or not you're going to get discouraged. That's a given. Multiple times you're going to get discouraged. Hear me on this. It's the decisions that you make when you're discouraged that will tell the truth about whether or not that discouragement is going to brand you or you're going to get through it. All movement and change in life is not a response to the emotions, but they're a response to the mind driven by the will. It's thinking right still doesn't change anything. It is the verb position that changes things. It's the verb position that changes things. You can think right, but still be in a funk. It is the will. It is the will. And I'm not denying the emotions, but our emotions, they're great passengers, but they're horrible drivers. They can tell you what's wrong. You missed the turn there, like my wife says, you're going to that, and there ain't no steering wheel over there. She reminded me. But at any rate, right? Yeah, okay. That shouldn't have said all that. So I said that. Happy life. Now, here are 5 critical choices, and I won't put too much meat on the bone here. But I've discovered in my own life. What do I do when discouragement comes knocking on my door, trespassing my domain? I've gone to the doctor and I got this report.
There's this haze, there's this uncertainty. What do I do? Well, the very first thing that I have to choose is that I have to choose truth. Truth in two ways. Truth, number one, about the situation. Just stare at it. Look at it. Discouragement and fear are two sides of the same coin. And you got to face your fear. You got to face the truth about what was said. The devil may have bought it, but the Lord may have sent it. You got to face the truth. Normally for me, I've had to learn the hard way, trust me. It's the old line, experience ain't always the best teacher, but it is the only school a fool will attend. I've learned the hard way about this one. I've had to learn that when I take a body blow and a gut punch, I should not react right then. Because it's going to be exaggerated. It is going to be exaggerated. The best thing for me to do is just back away, sleep, revisit it the next day, and more often than not, it ain't as bad as I thought. In all honesty, sometimes it's worse. But you revisit it. But the real truth that I'm talking about is that we've got to choose the truth of this book, the truth of God's Word. One of my pet peeves with Christians is this. Too many of us as Christians, you are using the Bible as a point of reference rather than the context of our lives. That's a problem. Problem in our churches. I'm talking about folks who go to Bible study and, precepts and BSF and all the other stuff and all this. You got to decide that this book is going to calibrate everything about me. So you choose that truth to be your delight, what is constant. I get going here. The second decision and choice that I need to make when discouragement gives me a body blow is that you don't think I'm nuts when I say this one. You have to choose joy. He said, Crawford, how do you drinking? But we choose joy. Joy is just an involuntary response. How do I choose joy? Well, no, it's not. No, it's not. Do you know the Bible commands emotions? This is what Paul said in Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say rejoice. Context. You know where Paul was when he wrote that? You know where he was, right? He was in jail. We ain't talking Club Med. He was in jail, right? Ministry had been taken from him. And he's in jail because of trumped-up charges. They lied on him. And history tells us he was decapitated. He knew that stuff wasn't ending well. And yet he says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I'm going to say rejoice. I can't help but think that maybe he was thinking about how the church of Philippi got started at Acts 16. They're in Macedonia. He and Silas go on this summer missions program trip. And Silas says, yeah, I'll go with you. I'm a little bit foodie here. That Macedonia has some nice restaurants and this kind of thing. Pass us some gospel tracts in the Torah. It might be nice, send a little prayer block back to our supporters, and, it'll be good. Well, they get there, and Paul's preaching and sharing, and this little girl that's demon-possessed is following Paul, and I love Paul. Man, Luke writes this, and Luke writes probably what I would have felt. It says, I love this line. It said, and Paul got annoyed. This girl got on his last nerve. So he turns around, casts the demon out, and what happens? He gets beaten, the snot beat out of him, right? Now we have to understand here the beating that he gets. We read these things and we just totally detach from the emotional context here. Say he was beaten doesn't mean that he was pushed around. I think they both had contusions, broken eye socket, busted lip, they got blood all over themselves, they throw him in jail. Now, if I'm in jail with Paul, I'm saying to Paul, hold up, man, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for this, man. What did we do wrong? You know what those dudes are doing? I mean, split lip, eyes swollen, I don't know, broken arm, I don't know. You know what they're doing? They're singing. cost of his mind? No. Because here's the point. Joy and rejoicing in the Bible is not tied to circumstances. It's tied to that which can never be affected. Did you hear what I just said? Joy and rejoicing is tied to that which can never be affected. Who and what shall separate us from the love of God? So when Paul says rejoice in the Lord always, and again I will say rejoice, your salvation can never be affected. Where you're going can never be tampered with. Yeah, you cry. Yeah, your heart breaks. But no one and nothing can take that away from us. And it's real. And I think God allows us to be discouraged, to recalibrate our perspective and say, Crawford, what have you been looking at? Maybe you've placed too much hope in that. Maybe your favorable outcomes have been a little bit too predictable. And it's become subtly an idol to you. Thirdly, you choose. Truth, joy, you choose faith. Faith in the Bible is not denial. Hebrews 11:1, 11:6. Faith in the Bible is not denial. It's not the denial of bad circumstances. And I tell folks all the time, be careful with your TV preachers and say stuff like, don't claim that, don't claim that. You ain't sick, don't claim that. The Bible never teaches that nonsense. Never teaches that. Never, ever, ever will you ever read in the Bible great men and women of God denying the reality of hard stuff. Now I've had folks as a pastor, they come in the office and say, well, you know, they say I've got a stomach flu and this kind of thing, but I'm not claiming that. You threw up on my carpet. Who did that? I don't care who. No, he ain't claiming it. It's out of you now. So, the silliness that we get into. So, Bible doesn't take the faith in the Bible is not denial. Faith in the Bible is defiance, where it looks through and embraces the reality of that. Yes, this is bad. Yes, but God is greater. Like the woman with the issue of blood, if I can just come in contact and just touch it. 12 years, spent everything she had, destitute. She said, I would touch the hem of his garment because she was probably Jewish, because she was bleeding. According to the Levitical code, she was unclean. So she's on her knees, dodging ankles. Hundreds of people around Jesus bumping up against them, according to the Luke 8 account and Mark 5. Right? Disciples doing crowd control. And this lady touches him. And Jesus says, who touched me? And Peter's going, they're really bumping up against you. And Jesus said, no, you don't hear it, buddy. They handled me. But somebody touched me. Faith is desperation in the Scriptures. How desperate are you to get to Jesus? And God uses our discouragement to fuel our desperation. How desperate are you to get to Jesus? Now, Crawford, your contacts can't solve this one, right? Your resources, they can't solve this one. You give up hope. You get in a fetal position. You're going to quit. Or you're going to say, if I can just touch the fringe of his garment. Number 4. You have to choose community. Galatians 6:2, right? Bear one another's burdens. Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Those two passages summarizes the two big buckets that reflect the meaning and purpose of community. Galatians 6, support. Romans 12, empathy, identification. God has no independent contractors. There's no such thing as an independent Christian. we're saved is not, the problem with Christianity here in the Western world is that it is too hyper-individualized. That's our problem. And it's anti-biblical. We have a poor applicational theology of the church. We are placed in the body. And there cannot be positive sanctification apart from relationship. We're members one of another. We need each other. And I tell my introvert friends, and this is going to surprise you when I say this. Most people think I'm an extrovert because I'm with a lot of people all the time. No, I'm a psychologist. Wonderful study. They love to study Jews like me. I'm so screwed up because I am an introvert who loves people. I'm not socially awkward. I like being around people. I like finding out what's going on in their lives. I like interacting with them. I don't go to the party and sit in the corner and say, Karen, come on, let's go. I don't know these folks. I don't do that at all. However, I don't get my energy from people. I don't. I mean, I like being with them, but I don't get my energy from people. My assistant handles our schedule, and people say, well, we want Crawford to come to our city, or what do we need to do for them? I mean, can we take them here? And they said, nah, Crawford's low maintenance. Just put me in a room, they ain't got nothing problem on me, I'm cool. It's fine. I mean, However, here's the deal. For my introvert friends here, what we have to be careful of when we get discouraged, we tend to take an extra lap around Mount Sinai in isolation. Okay? We tend to keep our own counsel a little bit too long. And isolation always breeds distortion. And we need one another. And by the way, it takes humility. Your pride, my pride will destroy us. We'll be destroyed by pride. Now, that's all right, I'm good. You're lying, you ain't good. I shouldn't say this. Well, I'll say it, I might say it. As you get older, your filter gets loose. But one of the things that used to bug me as a pastor? Bug me to no end. I pastored, our church was in Roswell, great community, great folks in our church. But Roswell's a little high-end community, okay? And here's the problem. Sometimes with higher-end communities, sometimes people can get a little bit tempted toward image management. You know what I mean? You got to look the part of living in a gated community and this kind of thing. You got to, you got to, and you can't admit that you struggle. And it used to just bug me to know that people would wait too late to ask for help. And this stuff is glowing in the dark before you humble yourself. And you say, why didn't you ask somebody? Why didn't you? Well, I didn't want to be like anybody. You pay for the team here. You pay their salaries in the care ministry. What do you mean you're But anyway, that's just a little pet peeve now. That we all have. And the final one is this. I hate to say this, but sometimes you just have to will yourself, number 5, to choose service. There are times in which you're discouraged and you want to quit. You got to force yourself to keep moving. I mean, that's all there is to it. Sometimes you just have to force yourself to keep moving. Psalm 126. Those who sow in tears shall reap with joy. There have been times at that church I've been in early morning service, sitting in the parking lot on Sunday morning, and tears run down my cheeks. I'm thinking about something specific that our family went through. Didn't feel like preaching. I have to say, Holy Ghost, one more time. There's seasons in your life where you have to define your emotions. You have to define your feelings. And I'm not saying that you're trying to be some hero there, But sometimes God just orchestrates that. He said, I want to carry you, Crawford. Will you let me carry you? Will you let me see you? So, I lied. I went far from his word. So, okay. Why don't we just take a break right now, okay? And for a few minutes, and we'll come back and have some Q&A. Is that right? Okay. Thank you.
All right, I have a stack of note cards here, but these do not preclude you asking the spontaneous questions. So I hope that we'll have a dialogue together with Dr. Loritts. So he's in the hot seat now. So first question, this is a really good one, and a really present, a really immediate question. How do we overcome the discouragement created by our divisive culture?
Whoa. You guys kind of go right for it, don't you? Well, I actually think it's back to something that I said earlier, and I could spend a whole lot of time on this one right here. I think, number one, I think as Christians over these last 5 or 6 years have had too much to say. I think we just have too much to say. And so I think what needs to take place is frankly, in the midst of all of this division, what needs to take place is what I said earlier, is that we've got to model the destination at which the culture needs to arrive. And I think we need to stop lobbing grenades back and forth about who's woke and who's not woke, and who's baptized in CRT and who's not baptized in CRT, and who's candidate and who represents the moral perspective and this kind of thing. I think what we need to do is back away and get back to gospel clarity. Get back to gospel clarity. Get back to preaching the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Get back to discipling people. One of the problems is that it's like believers, all of us have these, I picture it this way, we're in a crowded room, shoulder to shoulder, but the problem is all of us have these cups of coffee that are too full with scalding hot coffee. And we're bumping up against each other and we're burning each other. What we need to do, pour some of the coffee out, sit it down for a while, let it cool off, and then get back and engage with these things. What has happened here, and this, you asked me a question that really is an essence to my heart. I'm random here. My sons have asked me, he said, Dad, you know, you were 18 when Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. Right, that's true. I came of age during the Civil Rights Movement into the 70s. He said, what's different today about then? And I said, if you're asking me, is it worse today than then? I would say, on many levels, it is worse today. Because back in the 70s and 80s, Christians could dialogue about these things. We weren't as knee-jerk reactionary, and I don't know what has happened to us. I think I do, and I'm afraid to say it, okay? I think we have been contaminated by culture war theology. And what do I mean by that? Now, there are issues that I agree with among people who are fighting the culture war battles. That I agree. You know, I'm not ashamed to say this. I'm pro-life. I agree with that. I agree with so many of those things. But the problem is that their menu of sins is limited. And so when you get sucked into the selective denunciation of sin, all these other issues can threaten your agenda. And before you know it, you get pulled into power motivations and dominance motivations, then transformation motivation. And so evangelicals have been co-opted to becoming a voting bloc. And we've wandered away from the comprehensive nature of the gospel, as far as I'm concerned. See, there's never a time in which it's okay for any follower of Christ to not demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit. Never. Ever, 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 ever. And we need to stop this nonsense of, well, we're being prophetic. No, you're not being prophetic. You're being ornery. You're being nasty, and it's not right. So I think it's getting back to leading with biblical Christianity, getting back to underscoring the image of God that's been placed in every person's heart and mind, getting back to what the Bible comprehensively teaches about justice, the three tributaries that flow into this stream of justice. The conceived must live, the living must be cared for, and the poor and oppressed must be defended. It's a comprehensive, those are the three big tributaries that flow toward this thing. And stop letting other Christians think for us, but pursue this gospel clarity. And I think as we model that and stop talking so much. Stop talking. There are folks on my social media feed. I say, you talk so much, you sound stupid. No, anybody else feel that way? I mean, you just sound stupid.
Yes.
And you start defending the indefensible. We get into this relative morality thing. I mean, just because you hold on to the right issues doesn't give you a pass for lying and having poor character and cheating on your wife. That doesn't give you a pass. That's wrong. And if I can't say that's wrong, then you say, oh, well, you're being disloyal because, he believes in religious freedom and he believes he's pro-life. Yeah, that's true. But if I'm going to maintain prophetic integrity, then I have to say that is true. I'm glad about that. But, you just lied about so-and-so, and that ain't right either. So, anyway, I'm sorry. That question triggers me. Maybe I have too much to say. Let's go to the next question.
All right, next is, have you ever had a leading from God that turned out to be a dead end, and how did you recover?
Yeah, because that's a wonderful question. And I'm going to tell you, part of our assumption is that God always leads us towards success. He doesn't. Sometimes God will definitely lead us to do stuff that will fail. Because our character is more important. And he wants to put us in situations where the outcome is not what we anticipated. And so, it crushes us, it deals with our pride, it deals with these other... Yes, I've been in situations like that. God, I thought I heard you. Now, I've been in situations where I thought I heard God, but I didn't. That wasn't God speaking. That was wishful thinking speaking, and that's wrong. So you got to be... But I have had experiences in my life when I knew the Lord led me. We moved to Dallas, Texas in 1976. Tony Evans and I co-founded Oak Bible Fellowship, and we were there for 2 years, and that was just a very difficult time. And everything that I thought, but yet God led us. And I look back, and the isolation was the greater gift. But he did call us there. So be very careful of having a one-dimensional measurement of success. Be kind of careful of that. Outcomes are not necessarily everything that there is. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think we should be doing stuff that will, But sometimes, yeah, God does that.
A best tip to stay motivated.
Well, like my daddy, my father was the hardest working man in the world. He said, son, the responsibility wakes me up every morning. And, I think it's your daily communion with God, your walk with God every single day, maintaining your spiritual health, and maintaining, I don't use the word balance anymore. I stopped using that years ago, but maintaining the dynamic tensions in your life that give you health, keep you there. And I think keeping the why in front of you, not the what, but the why in front of you. That brings, and once you're clear about that, and your walk with God, that keeps you going. Now, sometimes, as I said earlier, feeling motivated is not necessarily the ultimate criteria upon which I need to make decisions. Because a lot of times I don't feel motivated. And so, but that's part of it too, and I understand that. Sometimes it's just hard. Sometimes your decisions just are. And so, I think you need to be careful about that. Sometimes you do it out of duty. That's not being a hypocrite, by the way. Sometimes you just do it out of duty. But I think it is, even then though, if you can keep in your head why, that will motivate you to keep moving even when you don't feel the motivation.
Okay. At what point, and correct me, Ryder, if I'm misspelling something here, at what point does following Jesus lead into leading people? At what point does following Jesus lead into leading people?
I don't know if I understand the question.
My question, I guess, is we talk a lot about leadership, and which is great. But every time we hear Jesus speak, it's follow me, which will obviously become into leadership. But how do we make sure that it's not just leadership?
I got you. That's right. Yeah. I'm going to say something that will almost seem like I'm discounting and contradicting everything I said in the first part of things. I think we have made too much of leadership. I do. Now, it's a paradox. Leadership is important, but we've made too much of leadership. The great godly leaders that I know don't think much about leading. They don't think much about it. It is what it is. You know, it's kind of like insecure people are the ones who are constantly talking about who they are. That's true. Insecure people are the ones who are constantly talking about who they are. They're constantly talking about their gifts. They're constantly talking about the dues that they pay. So I think first of all, it's a mindset. You can't, and leadership falls in two buckets. Everybody has a responsibility to influence, and we do lead in certain ways, but then there's the gift of leadership. And mature people who have a spiritual gift, they don't talk about this spiritual gift. You know, again, good meat makes its own gravy, right? You know, they just do it. They just do it.
That's a great line.
My mom used to say that. The greatest theologian I ever met in my life. You know, you just do what you do. You just do what you do. I mean, the great leaders that had impact on my life, I never heard Bill Bryant or Robinson McQuilkin, who was such an understated. You never ever heard them talk about their role as a leader. So leadership is all about following. In fact, I tell younger leaders this all the time. Don't ever follow anybody who's not following somebody. Don't do that. Don't ever follow anybody that's not following somebody. And once a leader stops following, he's lost his authority to lead. So
Yeah, but see, you just focus on what God called you to do and on following Jesus, and you turn around and you'll find people following you. And so you can't make that happen. You didn't answer me this one, but as soon as I said this, I needed to say a little pet peeve that I have. So, there's a common little statement going around that's not necessarily true. Okay, sometimes we quote these things, and I've said this myself, and then after I finished saying that, I thought, something wrong with that statement. Here's a statement that's been made in leadership circles. The real test of leadership is followership. Biblically, that ain't true. If that were true, then Jesus was a failure. If that's true, then Paul was a failure. So, it's not, so, I don't even know why the word following triggered that thing here. You guys are triggering me. So I think sometimes we have to be kind of careful. Now, generally speaking, don't get me wrong. I mean, if leaders making stupid decisions and abusing people and nobody's listening to them, this kind of thing, say, yo, dude, not everybody's wrong. It could be you. So I do get that. But be kind of careful of making universal statements about things that are not necessarily accurate. Did I answer your question kind of, sort of?
Yeah, I guess a lot of the preachers that we follow, right, that are on social media, all talk about leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like C.S. Lewis, Bonhoeffer, didn't really talk about leadership. And so there's this, us growing up, it's like, oh, leadership, and then, because of school and we get to learn about history and all of the saints, right? Like, they never really shared that leadership thing. So that's where I was like,
Gerard, can I add something? Because we were talking about this before the question. I think the vibe would be Gerard would be as young guys like us were told to be leaders before we were taught to be followers.
Yeah,
And I think what we're talking about, we don't really feel like where that transition of like following becomes leading, because so early on we were told like, you're expected to be a leader, this is what leadership looks like, this is what is expected of you. But there wasn't a whole lot of like, what you just said a minute ago was like, the leading is in the following.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think but see, this is another illustration sometimes of the obsession with leadership. I think you make disciples and you appoint leaders. But the leadership is demonstrated. This is the reason why I tell people all the time, maybe, there's no school that's ever produced a leader. No organization has ever produced a leader. None. You can't go to a school, take a study course on leadership, and then I'm a leader, stamp on my forehead. No, that's not true. That's true. You can develop it, you can refine it, but you can't make it. And so I think there needs to be healthy back away from it. And what I would say to you guys, the younger guys, I would say don't even obsess over that. I think the two things that you need to focus on in following is clarity about what you're supposed to do right now. Clarity about that. And faithfulness in executing that. And faithfulness is his own marketing strategy. Faithfulness is his own brand. And you do that, then the doors are open. Whether or not somebody wants to say you're a leader or you're not a leader or this kind of, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're faithful in doing what you're assigned to do right where you are, and God will bring the platform to you if He wants you to have that. And so focus on following, and I think you're right on. I do think, even have to say, it's all a matter of proportion too, because there does need to be clarity about leadership, and there does need to be information about it. But I do think that we've kind of skewed too much to that. And so, you start taking credit, or people start aspiring for gifts that they don't have. It's like, I used to teach preaching, right? They say those who can't teach. So I used to teach preaching, but one of the things that I would say to our classes, and this is on seminary level, is that, hey, look, just because you have a desire to preach doesn't necessarily mean that you're a gifted preacher.
That's right.
Hey, you can learn the skills of it, but still be at best D plus or C minus. So, you know, you got to be called to do this thing, and God has to confirm that to you and what happens. So, kind of, sort of. Yeah. Okay.
All right, I'm going to try to pare this question down, so whoever wrote it, if I'm missing it, please do pipe up. But you talked about radical immediate obedience, and your fourth point at the end was about seeking community, right? Making sure we're connected to community, connected to the church. So the question is, how does radical immediate obedience work if it goes in a different direction than the church you're connected with?
Okay. So let me share with you something I shared with our elders many years ago. So I get along with the Lord, and I sense God speaking in my heart about the church needs to do this, and this is on my heart. I come to our elders, right? I submit it to their leadership. And I say, here's what's on my heart. I spent a day with the Lord, and I say, bing, here it is. And they say, I don't know. I don't know if we're there, buddy. So I'm going to go back and pray again. Get some counsel. Think it through. If it's still in my heart and I come back, I say, guys, I'm still feeling the same way. And they said, no, we're still feeling the same way. Okay, and I'm going to go pray a third time. I'm going to think it through, But this time if I come back and they say, Crawford, no. But I'm convinced in my heart this is what God wants me to do. Well, at that point, I'm going to leave that place so fast my shirt tail doesn't touch my backside. Because it may be that, God, yeah, that's what God wants me to do. They may not be wrong, but this is not where He wants me to do it. So everybody needs to be submitted to authority. And I always am very careful of people running around saying, God told me, God told me, God told me. Sometimes that's a little bit of, they're pimping God, you know, they're kind of like brokering God to get their way, right? And I don't need to watch that language. And so I think that you need to listen to wisdom. I think you need to be patient, this kind of thing. But if you still feel like this is what God wants you to do, then if they don't want you to do it at that church, you go someplace else. I mean, that's about it.
Could you say something about the challenges and beauty of pastoring a diverse church?
Yeah.
And maybe something about the demographic of Fellowship and
Yeah.
Roswell, and you know that whole scene.
Yeah.
As you know, Point is tremendously diverse
Yes.
body and
Yeah.
community, so that resonates with us.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot I can say about that. Love our church, just love Fellowship Bible Church. And when I got there, it's probably, this is generous, probably 96, 97% white. And I did not come to Fellowship to make an ethnic statement. Okay? I came there because God led me there and to love the people and to preach the book. And when I left, we were, get the numbers right, we were about 70% white, about roughly 30% African American. Then we had a fellowship in Espanol that we started, and this kind of thing. And the church became more diverse in the community, and it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. Here's what I tell people all the time when they're pressing into diversity. Diversity cannot be your goal. Can't be your goal. Unity has to be your goal. Unity has to be your goal.
And if unity is your goal, diversity will be a key indicator. But if you make diversity your goal, you will fool yourself into thinking that you have heart unity. You can have a visibly diverse church, but you'll have islands of independent contractors. What your goal is unity. The goal of the New Testament is unity. And so Paul approached it that way. And the problem is if you're, and I tell younger guys this all the time, if your passion is to have a diverse church and then you keep preaching everything you see is just, you just keep preaching on diversity and this kind of thing, well, what you need to do is just preach on the transcendent unifying themes of the New Testament, of the scriptures that pull people together. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't do certain things. Obviously, optics are important and the worship team and the styles of music. Yeah, you do that kind of thing. But your goal is maturity and unity. That's what your goal is, okay? And so that's the place we begin. I think the key mistake younger guys make is that they make transactional processes core values. And you don't make a transactional process a core value. You make it an outcome. Core values are identity statements. And every church should be a reflection. Now, there's theology behind all of this. Obviously, that the church is a visible representation of the glorious kingdom, right? Revelation 7. And that wherever possible, the church is to be a visible model of what our eternal reality is going to be like. Number two, this is by way of implication and strategic application, and that is that there's not a church in the New Testament that is not multi-ethnic. Not one. Not one. Think about that for a moment. And I would argue that the racism there was even more intentional. And so the other piece is that just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's wrong. We have this pragmatic approach to church growth and planning and this kind of thing. But when the Apostle Paul, he did 7 things whenever he visited a city. The first thing is that he went to the Agora. He went to the synagogue and preached to the Jews. They got converted. Then he went out to the Agora, the marketplace where the Gentiles hung out. They got converted, right? Now check this out. Check this out. They didn't exchange choirs. They didn't exchange pulpits. They didn't need a house. Does it feel to be Jewish? Does it feel to be Gentile? And maybe we can try this. We have different cultures. He put them together immediately. Immediately. Because he believed what he wrote in Romans 1:16. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, but it's the power of God. And his view of God's power was not just individualistic, it was also corporate. Were there messes? Yes. But the church of Jesus had to tell the truth about the universal nature of the gospel. And so there's theological underpinnings of that, but I would argue even that was about unity. Unity. And one of the salvo here, Ephesians 2, there's an astonishing statement. It's very end. It says that the church is the dwelling place of God in the world. American evangelicalism has made the church about us. And not about the power of God. And by the way, in context, that statement comes when he's discussing how the wall of partition has been broken down and that there was access. And that was not just meant to be the universal church. No, he's talking about the visibility of all of that should take place. So this is kind of like stuff that goes into the crock pot of our thinking. But so if I would just summarize it, I would just say, unity is the goal. Unity is the goal. And as a result, when at all possible, I don't think, having said all this, I don't think every church needs to be diverse. You know, I'm getting on a plane tomorrow morning and I'm going to Bismarck, North Dakota, and I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of diversity there. So, unless you want to import them, I mean, the governor of Texas did that, didn't he? We can do that. So, I'm not being silly or stupid with this. I don't think every church needs, but every church does need to reflect the community in which it's located. And if you have that opportunity and you don't do that, I think it's sinful. So,
I'll ask one more question and open it up to you all. So think about what you would like to talk about. The difference between unity and uniformity. So sometimes I think I'm fuzzy on that in a church setting.
yeah. Well, you know, unity is the absence of dissonance and not the absence of differentiation. There was a piano here. It plays C major. They're different, but there's no dissonance there. But if I just bang down on the piano, there's dissonance there. Classic illustration is, biblically, is 1 Corinthians 12, with the delineation of all these gifts and abilities, and yet there's one body, all working together. So, it's not uniformity. Not everybody has the same gifts, not everybody has the same personality. I want to say this too. Disagreement does not mean disunity. It doesn't mean that at all. You can disagree with someone and not be divisive. It happens all the time. But it does mean that we're in agreement on the common core. We're in agreement on the common core. I put it this way. We don't put primary passions into secondary issues. And I'm sure here, point your wrath, I'm sure in your faculty, I'm sure, you know, like even among our elders, and if you press us on secondary issues, we disagree on a number of things. Just, you know, but that doesn't mean we just, but on the primary things, the things that are core to biblical Christianity, the substitutionary atonement, the bodily resurrection from the dead, salvation by grace through faith. It is the foundational things that we agree on. And so that might flesh itself out in different ways. But that's unity. So you can differ, but be unified. And it has to do with goal. Now let me say this too. The problem is that there's no such thing as unity apart from sacrifice. You can't have unity without there being sacrifice. The very nature. Unity without sacrifice is just a negotiated relationship. But you have to have sacrifice. It's the same as biblical love. You can't love apart from sacrifice. So, in order to be unified with someone, I'm constantly saying, okay. I got 6 silver bullets and 24 targets. So I got to edit the stuff that I shoot at. Right? I don't have the privilege of being secondary. And it requires maturity. It requires maturity. Am I going to go to Matt on that? It's sort of like my daughter might shoot me on this. My oldest grandson, he's now 21. I hadn't seen him in a long time. He came to Atlanta last year.
this young lady and stuff. So Quentin has let his hair roll way up here. So in fact, I went to when I was there waiting for him to get off the plane, and I was there, and they should have been there. So I said, "Q, man, where are you?" I said, "Well, Papa, I'm here." So where are you? So I'm over here. Well, I didn't recognize him here walking by me. I called his mom. Yeah, he's here. He's having a great time. This kind of thing. She said, "Well, are you going to take him to the barbershop?" I said, "No." I said, "Quentin loves Jesus. Yeah, he's a great kid, and it's just hair." And so, unity requires proportionate thinking, requires sacrifice, requires focusing on what's really important. And,
All right, we have a little less than 10 minutes. So what questions? Go right ahead.
So a lot of what we've talked about over the last several questions is stuff that I've been thinking about a lot just in my own time, spending time thinking through. A lot about the way that the big church breaks into little churches, and there is this disunity at times. I grew up in a tradition that would have had different ideas of what a primary concern is. And I now work for a school that has no denominational backing, which because my school shares a parking lot with Fellowship Bible Church.
yeah.
So I find myself wondering, how do we, and maybe what are some strategies you've used to partner churches together and work between individual churches in service of the larger church and overcome those things? Because even in my job at Fellowship Christian School, we have a bunch of denominations represented, but even within the confines of the school, those walls still come up over and over and over again. So how do we get our churches and our people to say, hey, we're going to step outside of our individual church and better partner with the larger body? And what are some strategies you use to do that?
Yeah, well, we started this thing in years ago, and there in Roswell. It was just a coalition of about 16 churches there for Roswell Day of Hope, and part of the deal was just what you're saying here. When you're doing stuff together that benefits the community, that we can all focus on, we're sharing the gospel together, that brings us together. And I'm going to say something that part of the problem that we have, all roads lead back to relationships. All roads lead back to relationships. You try to do stuff together with people that you have no relationship with, and then you get frustrated because they don't respond. And the reason why they don't respond is because there's not the element of trust that's there, and there's patterns of behavior, and and that's the old archery term. Error is always increased with distance, and you end up making big assumptions about one another. And this is the problem that we have. So my thing is this. I think leaders need to spend the time developing relationships with people who are different than they are, without any strategy, without anything that we got to do, without something that's driving that other than a relationship. And now you're looking at a guy that's very patient, okay? Crawford 30 years ago would not be saying this. But I've seen over time, if you spend the time, then the impact is exponential on the other side. Our biggest problem that we have is that we don't know each other. We don't know. And I used to say this at Fellowship. I said, because we start patting ourselves on the back about all the number of diverse this and diverse that. I said, I'm old as dirt, so what are they going to fire me? And so I used to say that all the time. Sunday morning I said, don't brag about that. Diversity is not who you sit next to in the service. We have all kinds of diverse people in the service. It doesn't mean that we are authentically unified. It just means that you sit next to somebody that's black, or you sit next to somebody that's Hispanic, or you sit next to somebody that's white. That's all that means. But real heart unity means it's who you do life with.
who do you know? Who you eating lunch with and doing dinner with and hanging out with and praying with and getting involved with one another. So there's a heart connection. And that heart connection will recalibrate your thinking. And it will cause you not to make silly, universal statements about all white folks or all black folks. Let me tell you a story. In 1996, I got a new car. And I just dropped my son off at school, our youngest son, high school up there. It was Highway 29. We were living in Fairburn, and it was Creekside High School. They were doing some construction work on Highway 29. They had a temporary stop sign there. I pull out, and this guy was way in the back of this line. There's a long line waiting to turn in to go in toward the school. And he was driving a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Never forget this. He whips out, and by the time he gets to me, he's going probably around 50, 55 miles per hour, right? And he didn't stop. He creamed me. If he had hit me this much further back, I'd be in glory. Airbags go off and so on. I jump out of the car. You know what he said to me? He said, "You dirty black son of a..." And he started dropping the N-word on me and this kind of thing. And in all honesty, full disclosure, in your mind is thinking, I said, this dude almost killed me. And he's calling me a son of a... What? And I started walking toward him. I was going to fellowship with him. So it's just weird. So I'm going somewhere with this. So I backed away and this kind of thing. Well, my wife finally shows up and this kind of thing, and she sees the car and she thinks she knows what's going on. So I'll never forget what I said to her. And I'll use the term, just graphic here. I said, sweetheart, God's done so many wonderful things in our life, and written books and got this radio stuff going and all of this. But the white folks, I'm just a dumb nigger. So I was ticked. And as soon as I said that, say the power of relationships, as soon as I said that, it's like the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, "Crawford, yeah. Would Dennis Rennie call you that? No. Would Josh McDowell call you that? No. Would Tim Cash call you that? No. Would your college roommate Bill Tarr call you that? No. In fact, all of those dudes would probably punch the guy's lights out." It was the power of love and relationship that recalibrated my thinking. And part of the folks in the evangelical community who are saying stupid stuff politically, universal statements about all black folks being woke and all of this kind, when you ask them, they have no significant relationship with anybody that's different from them. Or else they wouldn't say that. Or they would, if they said it, it would be nuanced. And so what I'm saying to you is that I think aggressively working on developing, the greatest thing you can do, the parents there at fellowship and the administrators there at fellowship, is say, let's not project this thing. Yeah, there's certain things we can do together, but let's not primarily project this thing. Let's build a relationship that will build the trust where we both can learn, and then you move ahead without making these assumptions.
I think we've got time for one more.
Crawford, I heard you interviewed by Annie Stanley, and kind of began, you talked about Christianity has become more of a reference point.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and actually it's a little bit of a play on what I said about the scriptures being a point of reference and not the context of our lives. And what I said in that interview with Andy is that this is where evangelicalism, I'm afraid, I'm just scared. I think we got to be careful what the enemy has done to us and all of this divisiveness and this rogue cultural war theology. We have begun to use our Christianity as a point of reference rather than the context of our lives. as a political power chip. And we're coming across as if we're no longer centralizing the cross and the resurrection of Jesus, and that this being my identity. And to be Christian means that I look like Jesus. In my attitudes, my behavior, my outlook, and this kind of thing, that I'm not some power broker that's, yanking a few Bible verses out of context and banging the culture upside the head with it.
Can we say thank you to Dr. Loritts for the